You won't believe what happened when a ruthless stepfather took everything from his own daughter. After years of torment, she uncovered a secret that shattered everything. But what she did next, in front of the entire village, will leave you speechless. Stay tuned, because the truth is about to be revealed. In the green, peaceful village of Isoma, life moved with rhythm and tradition. It was a place where every drumbeat carried a story, where every elder's word was sacred, and every child played freely under the golden sun. Among its people lived a woman named Zalifa, gentle, wise, and deeply loved. She wasn't just any woman, she was the healer of Isoma, the one people ran to when sickness came, or when a baby cried its first breath. Her hands were soft but strong, and her heart was full of kindness. People called her the Heart of Isoma, not because she was the richest or most powerful, but because she gave more love than anyone else. Zalefa lived in a small clay hut at the edge of the village, where tall baobab trees danced in the wind. Her daughter, little Dema, was the light of her life. Dema had a smile that could melt even the coldest heart. She was always running, laughing, playing with the other children, her hair bouncing in the breeze, her voice singing with joy. Villagers often said that Zalefa and Dema were like the sun and moon, different but perfectly together. Wherever Zalefa went, Dema followed, helping her mother grind herbs, carry water, and even comfort sick villagers with her tiny warm hands. Though they didn't have much, they had love. Zalefa would cook yam and beans over the fire, telling Dema stories of brave women and powerful queens. At night, they lay under the stars, whispering dreams and secrets to each other. Life was simple, but it was filled with peace. The villagers respected Zalefa, not just because she healed wounds, but because she listened. She helped the broken, fed the hungry, and held the grieving. But everything began to change the day he arrived. No one knew much about the man. He came limping through the forest path one evening, saying he was a hunter from far away. His clothes were torn, his eyes tired, and his voice soft, too soft. Zalefa, being the kind soul she was, took him in, fed him, and treated his wounds. The villagers praised her generosity once again, calling her a saint. Dema watched him quietly. Something about the way he looked at them made her uneasy, but she said nothing. After all, her mother trusted him. Slowly, this stranger became a regular face in their home. He helped around, fetched firewood, told stories of wild lands and beasts. He made the villagers laugh and slowly charmed everyone, including Zalefa. Dema began to smile less. Something in her little heart whispered that this man was hiding something, but Zalefa didn't notice. Her eyes saw hope. Her heart, which had been alone for too long, started to open. And so, in the peaceful village of Isoma, under the clear skies and trusting hearts, the seed of something dark was planted. A shadow was entering their home, and they didn't even know it yet. It was a cold, rainy evening when the village of Isoma met a stranger named Ekuro. He arrived soaked and limping, his clothes torn and his eyes full of stories. He said he was a hunter from the faraway mountains of Bunda, lost during a hunt. The villagers, moved by his tale, gathered around him, curious and kind. But it was Zalefa who stepped forward with open arms. She took him into her home, cleaned his wounds with her healing herbs, and gave him warm food and a place to sleep. Dema watched from behind the door, holding her breath, her young eyes studying him closely. Ekuro was everything a man should be, at least on the outside. He spoke softly, told jokes that made the women laugh, and helped elders carry firewood. In the market, he told stories of fighting wild beasts and surviving storms, and the men clapped him on the back like a brother. Slowly, Isoma welcomed him like one of their own, and Zalefa, she began to smile more. For the first time in years, someone called her beautiful. Someone helped her with the heavy water pots. Someone listened to her dreams. Within just a few months, Zalefa and Ekuro were married. The village drums beat with joy, and people danced through the night. Dema wore a white dress, her little hands holding a flower, but her face showed no smile. Something inside her didn't feel right. She had seen Ekuro's eyes when no one was looking, sharp like a knife, cold like river stones. But who would believe an 8-year-old child? At first he played the role well, but the moment the drums stopped and the last guests left their wedding, Ekuro changed. The softness in his voice disappeared. The smile that once warmed the room turned stiff and forced. Behind closed doors, he showed his true face, one of anger, control, and quiet cruelty. He no longer cared to pretend. He was never cruel to Zalefa, at least not in ways others could see. But with Dema, he was harsh, calculating. If she spilled a little water, she'd be sent to sleep outside on a mat near the goats. If she laughed too loudly, he'd silence her with a glare that froze her bones. He spoke little to her, but his silence was louder than thunder. Zalefa, caught in her happiness and distracted by village work, didn't see the signs. Ekuro made sure of that. He began planting fear in the house little by little. He moved Dema's bed to the back room, away from her mother. He gave her scraps to eat and scolded her for things she didn't do. And Dema, young and scared, didn't know how to speak up. The man who had charmed their village was now slowly turning her life into a quiet nightmare. But deep inside, something in Dema refused to break. Something that would one day make Ekuro regret ever stepping foot into Asoma. The seasons changed, and with them, Dema's laughter slowly vanished. The girl who once ran barefoot through the fields, whose joy lit up the village like sunrise, now walked with quiet steps and heavy eyes. Her mother, Zalefa, once the strongest woman in Asoma, with a voice that calmed babies and healed broken hearts, was no longer the same. Her shoulders slumped, her smiles faded. Her voice, once full of stories and songs, had become soft and unsure. The color in her cheeks disappeared, replaced by pale skin and dark shadows under her eyes. Villagers still greeted her with warmth, but Zalefa rarely stepped outside. She started missing gatherings, then ceremonies, then even her own herbal duties. And when she did appear, people noticed small bruises on her arms, her neck, her legs. "I slipped," she would say, eyes downcast. "I tripped over a stone." No one dared to question her more. Ekuro stood beside her with a firm grip on her shoulder and a charming smile that never reached his eyes. Inside the hut, things were worse than anyone imagined. Ekuro controlled everything. He took the money from Zalefa's healing work. He locked up the herbs she once used to help others. He stopped her from visiting old friends. Dema watched it all. Every cruel word, every silent tear. She begged her mother to leave, to tell someone, but Zalefa only shook her head. "It's fine, my child," she whispered once, touching Dema's face gently. "Just stay strong." Dema grew from a child to a young girl of 13, but her heart carried the weight of pain no child should ever bear. She learned to move silently, to listen behind doors, to hide when Akuro's voice rose. She also learned to fight back in small ways, saving a few herbs, sneaking out to talk to old Mama Nari, the only neighbor who still dared to visit sometimes. But her power was limited. Ekuro had taken control of their lives, piece by piece. Then came the stormy night that changed everything. Rain beat against the roof. Thunder shook the trees. Dema was in the back room when she heard shouting, loud, sharp, full of rage. She froze, heart pounding. Then came a crash. And then, silence. Terrified, she ran to the main room. What she saw burned itself into her memory forever. Zalefa was lying on the floor, eyes wide open, her body still, a small pool of blood beside her head. Ekuro stood in the corner, chest rising and falling. His face was blank, like nothing had happened. When Dema screamed, he spoke calmly. She slipped, hit her head on the stool. "Go call someone." The next day, the village gathered in mourning. Tears flowed like rivers, but no one questioned his story, not even the elders. "Such a tragedy," they said. "She must have lost balance." But Dema knew better. She felt it in her bones. That night, something inside her snapped. Her childhood ended, and a fire of truth began to burn deep in her soul. A fire that would not rest until the real story of Zalefa's death was known. After Zalefa's burial, the village returned to silence. But the air around Ekuro grew colder. Without hesitation or shame, he claimed the hut, the land, and everything Zalefa once owned. He called it his inheritance, waving off questions with a practiced smirk. No one challenged him, not the elders, not the neighbors. People whispered behind closed doors, but no one spoke aloud. Ekuro walked around like a king now, and little Dema became his servant. Every morning before the rooster crowed, Dema was already grinding yam, fetching water, and scrubbing the floors. Ekuro never said thank you. Instead, he barked orders, insulted her cooking, and threw plates when angry. He treated her like dust under his feet. At just 13, she worked like a grown woman, shoulders aching, eyes tired, her childhood stolen. At night, she lay on a thin mat in the corner, clutching the edge of her mother's old shawl, tears soaking her pillow. She whispered to the wind, hoping her mother's spirit could hear her. "Mama, please, help me." Then the dreams started. Every few nights, Dema would see her mother in her sleep, standing beneath the ancient baobab tree that grew near the river. Zalepha's mouth moved, but no sound came. Her face looked sad, but her eyes held urgency. She would lift one arm and point to something Dema couldn't see. The dreams repeated, each one more vivid than the last. Dema began to believe these weren't just dreams, they were messages. One afternoon, while sweeping the hut, Dema tripped over a loose edge of the floor mat. She knelt to fix it and noticed something strange, a wooden board slightly out of place. Her heart racing, she pulled it up and found a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a diary, her mother's handwriting, neat and soft, just as she remembered. Dema held it close, inhaling the scent of herbs and home. She opened it and began to read. Each page was a whisper from the past. Zalepha had documented her life with Ikuro, how he sweet-talked her, how the beatings began, how he threatened her to stay quiet. "He watches me even when I sleep," one page read. "I fear for my daughter. I fear for myself." As Dema flipped through the pages, her hands trembled. Then she reached the final entry. Her breath caught in her throat. "If I die suddenly, it was not an accident. Ikuro is hiding something in the calabash above the fireplace." Dema's eyes shot toward the calabash, an old dusty gourd that had always hung untouched above the fire. Her hands balled into fists. Her mother had left her a key, proof, a way to uncover the truth. In that moment, something in Dema changed. She wasn't just a servant anymore. She was her mother's daughter, and she was going to make sure the village knew what really happened behind those walls. Years slipped by like sand in the river. Dema, once full of light and laughter, now moved like a shadow in her own home. At 17, her eyes no longer filled with tears. They burned with quiet fire. She had learned to survive, to obey, to listen. But behind her calm face was a mind that remembered everything. Every time Ikuro barked an order, every cruel glance, every whisper of dark dreams. She remembered, and she waited. The diary never left her sleeping mat. Some nights, she read her mother's final words again and again, just to hold on to courage. Then one afternoon, when Ikuro was away in the forest, she gathered her strength and stepped toward the old calabash above the fireplace. Her hands shook as she reached for it. It was heavier than she expected. She brought it down and carefully opened the lid. The smell hit her first. Dry, old, strange. Inside were twisted feathers, brittle herbs wrapped in black string, a small animal skull, and carved bone pieces etched with strange symbols. Dema's breath caught. These were not ordinary charms. They were used by forbidden mountain priests, one said to bend minds, break spirits, and summon nightmares. She had heard whispers in the village about men who used such witchcraft to gain control, to bind people's will, even to kill without leaving a wound. Everything made sense now. Ikuro had used these dark charms to manipulate her mother, to break her spirit. He didn't just beat her, he cursed her. Zalepha's slow fading, the bruises, the silence. It had all been part of his twisted control. And now, Dema understood why her mother had written those final words. She had known she was being hunted inside her own home. Dema stared at the contents for a long time, her hands cold, her heart thudding like a drum. She had found the truth, but who would believe her? She was just a girl, and Ikuro was still respected by many in the village. If she accused him without proof, she could disappear next. But this time, Dema would not be alone. She couldn't. She began to plan. She started watching Ikuro more closely, noting the patterns of his behavior, the places he visited, and the people he whispered to. She remembered the old herbalist woman in the northern woods, rumored to understand ancient magic, and she thought of Elder Jamba, her mother's old friend, now rarely seen but once a wise voice in the village. Slowly, Dema began to reach out, in secret, in silence. She knew the truth now, and she wasn't going to keep it buried. The time to expose Ikuro was coming, and this time, she would speak not just for herself, but for Zalepha, the woman who once filled their home with love, laughter, and the smell of roasted yam. It was the season of Harmattan, when the air turned dry and the winds carried dust across the village paths, that a stranger cloaked in grey returned to Isoma. His back was slightly bent with age, but his eyes burned with wisdom and memory. The villagers whispered his name, Elder Mukosa. Years ago, he had left Isoma after being accused of practicing forbidden healing arts. Some feared him, others respected him, but no one could deny his power or his deep knowledge of the old ways. Dema heard the whispers and her heart skipped. She remembered stories her mother once told, how Mukosa had trained her in healing before he was forced to leave. He had been more than a teacher. He had been like family. That night, while Ekuro was away, Dema wrapped the calabash carefully and went to find Mukosa near the edge of the village, where he had set up a small hut under an old fig tree. When she showed him the calabash, his face grew still. He examined each item with gentle hands, muttering under his breath. Then he looked at Dema with sorrow and fire in his eyes. "This," he said, "is the work of soul-binding magic, slow and deadly. Your mother did not die by accident. Her life was taken piece by piece." Dema's heart pounded. She had suspected it, but hearing it confirmed by someone who knew her mother, it felt like her chest had cracked open. Tears welled in her eyes, but she held them back. "Can it be undone?" she asked. Mukosa nodded slowly. "The only way to expose such evil is through a ritual of reversal, one that calls back the truth from the spirit realm, but it must be done in the open, where all can see, during the Festival of Ancestors, when the veil is thin, and the spirits of the dead walk among us." Dema's mind raced. The festival was only 2 weeks away, a time when the entire village gathered, when drums echoed through the trees and everyone wore white to honor those who came before. It was the perfect time, but also the most dangerous. If they failed, if the ritual backfired, Ekuro could turn the village against them, or worse, silence her forever. Still, Dema's jaw tightened with determination. She had carried the weight of her mother's death alone for too long. Now, with Mukosa's help, there was a chance to reveal everything, to show Asoma what kind of man Ekuro truly was. She left Mukosa's hut that night, with a plan forming in her heart. No longer just a daughter in mourning, she was becoming a warrior of truth, and soon, the entire village would hear her mother's voice again, through her. As the days passed, Dema moved through the village like a quiet wind, unnoticed, but watching everything. With Elder Mukosa's guidance, she dug deeper into Ekuro's past. One night, while pretending to gather firewood near the river, she overheard 2 passing travelers from Bunda. They spoke in hushed tones, unaware she understood their dialect. What she heard made her blood run cold. They spoke of a hunter named Ekuro, who had once been accused of killing his wife and disappearing into the night. Heart pounding, Dema waited for them to leave and ran straight to Mukosa. He confirmed that such a case had been whispered about years ago. The description matched exactly. Ekuro hadn't just ruined her family, he had done it before. And worse, he used the same kind of dark ritual, draining life slowly while hiding behind charm and lies. Dema felt fire in her bones. This wasn't just revenge, it was justice. She had to stop him before he hurt someone else. With Kina by her side, her childhood friend who had always believed her, even when others called her paranoid, they began gathering real proof. Kina traveled to the edge of Bunda to speak with a woman who once knew Ekuro's first wife. She returned with a worn necklace, one the woman swore Ekuro had taken after his wife's mysterious death. Meanwhile, Elder Mukosa helped Dema gather testimonies from the older villagers. At first, they were hesitant. No one wanted to believe the man who had lived among them, smiled at their children, and shared palm wine at the village square could be capable of such evil. But as the stories began to line up, the way Zalefa changed after marrying him, the way Ekuro always avoided the sacred grove, the strange items found in his hut, doubt began to turn into belief. Still, Mukosa warned her, if they confronted Ekuro without the entire village present, he would simply disappear again, just like before. They needed to reveal everything at once, publicly, so he would have nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. So they began to plan. The Festival of Moaka was only days away. It was the biggest event in Asoma, when everyone, young and old, gathered at the Great Fire Square to honor the ancestors and celebrate life. Dema would use that moment. She would speak. She would show the calabash, her mother's diary, the testimonies, the necklace from Bunda. Everything had to be perfect. This was her chance to show the truth. Her mother's spirit deserved peace, and Asoma needed to know who they had allowed into their homes. The countdown had begun. The night of the Festival of Moaka arrived with vibrant colors, music, and celebration. The village square was alive with energy. Children laughed, elders shared tales, and dancers spun in circles around the sacred fire. It was the most important night of the year in Asoma, a time to honor the ancestors and connect with the spirit world. But for Dema, it was the night she had been waiting for, the night to finally expose the man who had destroyed her family. As the festivities reached their peak, Dema stepped forward. Her heart was pounding, but her voice was steady. She stood before the great fire, surrounded by the elders, the villagers, and Ekuro, who stood nearby, grinning as if nothing could touch him. Dema raised her hand and requested something unheard of in years, permission to perform the ritual of unveiling, a sacred act only allowed when someone believed the spirits had been wronged and a great lie needed to be revealed. The crowd fell silent. The drums stopped. Even the wind seemed to pause. The elders exchanged unsure glances before slowly nodding. Elder Mukosa stepped forward and began the ancient chants. His voice was deep and haunting, weaving through the night like a spell. The fire in the center of the square grew higher, its flames flickering with strange blue and green hues. Dema, with trembling hands, held up the old calabash, the same one her mother had warned about. Inside were the feathers, bones, and herbs used in the dark ritual. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Whispers stirred, but it wasn't until she read her mother's last diary entry aloud that the first cracks began to show in Akuro's mask. His smile twitched, his eyes darted. Then, the wind returned, fierce and wild. The flames roared upward, almost as if reaching toward the sky. And in that moment, a figure emerged from the fire. It was Zaleifa. Her face was calm, her eyes full of truth. She said no words. She didn't need to. She simply pointed, directly at Akuro. The crowd gasped, stepping back in shock. Mothers held their children closer. The elders stared in disbelief. Akuro froze. His charm faded like mist in the morning sun. He tried to speak, but no words came out. Then, Elder Mukosa declared what the spirit had confirmed, that Zaleifa's death was no accident, and that Ekuro had used forbidden rituals to harm and deceive. The silence that followed was heavy with realization. Ekuro's secrets were no longer hidden. Dema had done it. The truth was no longer buried, and the village of Asoma would never be the same again. As the fire crackled, and the echoes of Zaleifa's spirit still lingered in the air, Ekuro's confidence shattered. He tried to run, but the villagers closed in around him, their eyes full of judgment and fear. Dema stood tall, holding the diary in her hand. She slowly began to read aloud her mother's final words, her voice steady, each syllable cutting through the tension in the air. With each page she turned, the crowd grew more silent, their disbelief turning into understanding. Dema pointed to the calabash, holding it up for all to see. The bones, feathers and herbs that Ekuro had used in his dark rituals were now out in the open, unmistakable proof of his guilt. The weight of the truth hung heavily over him. But it wasn't just Dema's words that condemned him. Elders from Bunda, who had secretly travelled to Asoma, stepped forward and shared their testimony. They spoke of the mysterious death of Ekuro's previous wife, who had also fallen victim to his cruel use of dark magic. They told of the same ritual, the same patterns, and how Ekuro had fled when suspicion arose in their village years before. The village chief, Ebele, who had watched the events unfold with growing unease, stepped forward. His voice was strong as he addressed the gathered crowd, his authority unquestionable. "By the laws of our ancestors," he declared, "Ekuro is to be bound and tried for his crimes." Ekuro, who had been so confident moments before, now trembled with fear. His eyes darted around, looking for an escape, but there was none. As the villagers moved to restrain him, something strange happened. Ekuro collapsed to the ground, convulsing violently. His body twisted in pain, as if the very dark forces he had used to harm others had turned on him. It was a spiritual seizure, a consequence of the charm he had used to control and manipulate. The crowd gasped. This was a sign. Ekuro's own dark magic had backfired, a punishment from the very spirits he had tried to control. He lay there, trembling, powerless, as Dema stepped forward, her face calm, but filled with the strength of the truth. Ekuro's confession came in a broken, whispered voice, as though the spirits had drained his will to fight. I killed her, my wife, Zaleifa," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "I used the charms to control her, to make her suffer. I didn't mean for it to go this far." The village chief nodded solemnly. "Your confession seals your fate," he said. "You are no longer welcome here. You will be stripped of everything. You will wander the earth, nameless, without honor. This is the worst punishment in Asoma." The villagers, now fully aware of Ekuro's evil deeds, watched as he was stripped of his belongings. No riches, no name, no place to call home. He was left with nothing but his shame and the knowledge that he would never again walk with dignity. The crowd watched as Ekuro was led away, a broken man, to disappear into the wilderness, never to return. Dema stood tall, the weight of her mother's spirit now resting peacefully in the fire's glow. Justice had been served. As the fire crackled and the last remnants of the ritual faded into the night, Dema stood tall before the gathered villagers, her eyes burning with the fierce light of justice. Her voice was calm but unwavering, cutting through the silence that had fallen over Isoma. "My mother was the heart of Isoma," she declared, her words echoing across the gathering. "She was silenced, but truth found its voice through me." The villagers, who had once stood in uncertainty, now bowed their heads in shame and sorrow. The weight of their ignorance and complicity pressed heavily on them. They had allowed a man like Akuro to tear apart the life of a woman who had given so much to them, to their village. But now they were faced with the truth, and they could no longer deny it. In the ashes of Akuro's lies, they saw the spirit of Zalefa burning brighter than ever. In a gesture of remembrance and honor, the village came together to build a healing center in Zalefa's memory. It would stand as a symbol of strength, resilience, and compassion, values that Zalefa had embodied throughout her life. Dema, who had carried her mother's legacy through the darkness, was chosen as its leader. The healing center became a place where women, children, and the sick could find refuge, and where the lessons of Zalefa's life would continue to inspire generations to come. Years passed, and Dema's strength only grew. She became known as the Flame of Justice, a protector of women, truth, and spirit. Her reputation spread far beyond the borders of Isoma. She stood as a beacon for those who had been silenced, for those whose voices had been crushed by the weight of injustice. Dema helped bring justice to other villages, making sure that the legacy of her mother lived on in every life she touched. She was no longer just a daughter seeking justice for her mother. She was a symbol of hope, a warrior for the truth. As for Akuro, his fate was sealed. Rumors spread like wildfire about the once feared man who had tried to manipulate, control, and destroy. It was said that he wandered from village to village, begging for food and shelter, nameless, faceless, and haunted by the ghost of the woman he had thought he had silenced forever. Every village he visited rejected him, for they knew the story of the man who had taken a life and tried to hide his crimes. Wherever he went, the whispers followed him. Akuro was a man cursed by his own actions, and no matter how far he ran, he could never escape the shadow of his sins. And so, Isoma moved forward, its people forever changed. With Dema leading the way, they rebuilt their village and their lives, honoring the memory of Zalefa, the woman who had once been the heart of Isoma and would always remain its soul. The fire of justice had burned bright, and it would never fade. If Zalefa's story has touched your heart, and you feel the fire of justice burning within you, then you're not alone. Dema's courage, the truth that shattered lies, and the strength of a daughter who rose above her pain. This story is a testament to the power of truth and the relentless spirit of a woman who refused to stay silent. It's a reminder that no matter how dark the world may seem, the light of justice will always find its way through. Just like Dema, we all have the power to stand up for what's right, even when the odds are against us. If you believe in the power of truth, justice, and the strength of the human spirit, don't let this story end here. Please take a moment to like this video, share it with your friends and family, and let the world hear this message of hope. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories of resilience, courage, and triumph. Thank you so much for being part of this journey. Your support means everything, and together, we can spread these powerful messages to inspire and change lives.